to be an entrepreneurial lawyer with Josh Fitch. Smart Lawyers Position to Transition. I am Victoria Collier, and this is the Smart Lawyers Position to Transition podcast. And I am with our guest today, Josh Fitch, and we will be discussing how to successfully build a law firm business like an entrepreneur. Smart Lawyers Position to Transition transforms the lives of attorneys who want better, more valuable law firms that in time may want to sell and find a life after law. The information provided is not intended to be legal, financial, or any other kind of advice, just great information and sometimes entertainment. As lawyers, we are not trained or taught to be, think, or even see ourselves as entrepreneurs. In fact, we have a law practice, not a law business. And for years, it was actually even prohibited from being able to sell a law firm because it was all about the goodwill of the lawyer who was providing the services. But all that is changing, and more lawyers are starting to treat their practices as serious business. In addition to being lawyers, they are business owners. And our guest today is a lawyer, a business owner, and considers himself an entrepreneur and co-owner of Troxel Fitch, which is a multifaceted law firm built to support today's business owners and entrepreneurs. The founders' friendship began while they were in law school at the University of Colorado, and bound by their entrepreneurial spirits, and not spirits, were you drinking at the time? The founders' friendship began while in law school at the University of Colorado. They were bound by their entrepreneurial spirit and legal knowledge, and so they launched Troxel Fitch shortly after graduation. With his vision to build a better law firm in mind, Josh uses his experience, education, and passion to take clients to the top. Josh takes pride in serving clients' needs, starting with business formation, continuing throughout their business growth, and providing support beyond. Well, thank you so much for being here, Josh.
Thanks for having me, Victoria. Excited to be here.
Yeah, so I'm excited too because I started my law firm right out of law school as well, pretty much. And I started with a partner, but your partner is still with you. My partner left after 1 year. And so he retired, and that was kind of by design. But tell me about your experience meeting someone in law school or even school before law school and starting a partnership together, because you hear all the time, if you want to stay friends, you don't go into business together, but yet it seems to be working for you guys. So I'd love to hear about that.
Yeah, it certainly is working, but it was a treacherous proposition when we started. But I think we were kind of two of a mind, and we actually met on the first day of law school when they're doing kind of the new students orientation, and they put us all in the auditorium, and they're doing kind of the locker room speech. You know, look to your left, look to your right. One of you won't be here. These are the rates of depression and alcohol abuse and all those daunting stats that plague our profession. And after that day was over, everybody spills out into the courtyard of the law school, and it was pandemonium. People were crying, calling their parents, talking about dropping out. And I think him and I both grew up playing sports and had heard that type of talk before. So I was off in the back of the courtyard and kind of watching this unfold before my eyes. And he comes out of the building and kind of taken aback by it. And we kind of meet eyes across from the courtyard. And I asked, hey, do you want to go across the street to the bar and get a drink and talk about this? He's like, yeah, let's get out of here. So kind of from there, we developed a fast friendship and realized that we were very similar in the way that we approached law school and the law. And as we moved through law school, that kind of similar view on the practice of law and the career of being a lawyer kind of morphed for us to want something slightly different from the traditional path. And ultimately, as we brainstormed on that and thought what we wanted out of life and if that could coexist with what we wanted out of the practice, we realized that maybe starting a law firm together would be a good idea.
Well, do share the treacherous part, because it sounds so smooth so far. So what was the difficulties?
So I think, as many people know, starting a law firm or any business with your best friend means that you're putting the friendship at risk with the business's risk. And I think that was amplified by the fact that we decided to be roommates for starting the second year of law school. And because we came out of law school broke and couldn't afford apartments in Denver on our own, we continued to be roommates for 5 additional years, for a total of 7, 5 of which were when we were starting the law firm together, and 2 of which were during the COVID lockdowns, when his was probably the only face I saw for weeks on end.
Yeah.
So it was just a high pressure situation. And I think it resulted in having to really be conscious of when are we wearing our friend hat? When are we wearing our business partner hat? And where is the dividing line between those two things? Because when you can't even go into the office, and sometimes you're sitting on the couch watching TV as friends, and sometimes you're sitting on your laptops as business partners, and that distinction can be hard to identify. But I think we always
sometimes.
Go ahead.
No, go. I was going to say, and sometimes one's sitting on the couch watching TV while the other one's on the laptop thinking, why aren't you on your laptop instead of the TV, right?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And trying to find is, do we have to be perfect mirror images in our work schedule? Or do we have to always hang out together? Kind of finding those confines was definitely challenging. But I think just through really, at times, brutal honesty and holding yourself accountable to things, we kind of figured out each other's styles of operation, and we found where that line was, but it certainly wasn't always easy.
No, and it brings up a good point as far as a lot of budding entrepreneurs and business owners. They often hire their family members or their friends, and the lines are blurred as to what are our expectations from a professional sense versus our friendly sense as well.
Yeah, so I totally agree. I think it has to be something that's out there in the open. I think the trouble comes when you make assumptions and when you're not operating on the same page. And sometimes it's those difficult conversations and the ones that feel awkward where you have to say, I know everything was chill 5 minutes ago when we were laughing, but now we have to have a stern business conversation, and we have to really set expectations. And if one of the parties is not meeting those expectations, at times someone morphs from, 5 seconds ago, they were my best friend, but for these next 20 seconds, they're kind of like my boss. Not really my boss, but they are someone I have to answer to if I want this friendship and this business to survive. So it can be a tightrope sometimes.
Now, when you're guiding other businesses, are those the kind of issues that you help them with or set up expectations as to what they may be going through as their advisor?
Absolutely. And I think that's one of the most critical things that we advise clients on when they're starting their business is, it's the assumptions that hurt you. And that's what leads to hurt feelings. And hurt feelings can damage a business far greater than any kind of financial metrics or market conditions. So we always advise our clients to write down the expectations that you have for yourself and for your business partner, and make a series of promises to yourself that the other person will hold you accountable to. We rarely ask clients to impose a level of productivity on their business partner. We ask clients to imagine yourself at a high level of performance and write down what that looks like. And then your business partner's task is to hold you accountable to the promises you made to yourself, so that you can't say you're controlling me. It's no, I'm asking you to live up to the standard that you promised me that you would hold yourself to. And I think in that way, the business partners can combine to call the best out of each other rather than through some type of negative reinforcement, shame or guilt each other into some level of performance.
I love that. I love the way you outlined that and how that works. What if the partner's expectations of themselves aren't high enough than what you think they should be? How do we handle those situations?
I think that's when your role as counselor sometimes comes in, and you have to be the one to have the hard conversation and say, hey, are you sure that you're fully aware of what entrepreneurship requires? And there's times in that you can just pose a situation and say, from my experience, it's uncommon that an entrepreneur would have to do this. As I look at kind of what you've laid out, I don't see that type of challenge being met in the level of performance that you have committed to. What would you do in that situation? And sometimes the person realizes that they need to raise their standards, and other times they maybe realize, wow, I don't know if this is for me, or maybe I don't want to be an equal partner. Maybe I want to be a minority partner, or, an employee with equity. But I think you have to force those conversations, particularly at the early stage, because when the stakes get higher, when there's real money on the table, those conversations become very difficult. When everybody's at the original formation table and there's no real money involved, and you can just say, hey, let's think about higher principles. It's very easy for people to do that, and they call the best out of their own virtues. But when honoring such a higher principle means you might have to sacrifice a couple $100,000s, that becomes a lot easier or harder for the person to see the light in that situation.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So let me ask you this question. I've done a podcast recently on partners specifically, and where law firms go wrong with regard to starting off as partners and not having staff and all that kind of stuff, because where's the profit, right? And how can you scale and things like that. And it sounds like you and your partner did that exact thing. So I'm not sure if you've heard that podcast or not. But you started off saying that you wanted to do your law firm different than what y'all were familiar with law firms having been done already. Talk about how you've done it differently and how starting off as partners has not been a detriment to the two of you as you're building the firm and planning to scale it and certainly be profitable.
Yeah, I think it kind of all of that question goes to the foundation of how we view the purpose of running a law firm. And when we were originally contemplating this idea, we realized that a lawyer at your core, you sell your time for revenue and for profit. And as a basis for entrepreneurship, it's fantastic because legal services will always be in demand. And if you think about any business requires two main functions: creation of a product that the market wants, and then delivery of that product to the market. In a law firm, half of that equation is satisfied for you. You have a license to sell legal services, so you only have to figure out how do you deliver it. And as we were looking at going into the profession and seeing kind of the threat of being pigeonholed in certain roles, and also the kind of the crushing reality of being in a big firm, we realized that if we could take the risk and be entrepreneurial to start our own law firm and make 100% of the money that we make for selling our time, then it allows us to have the freedom to do whatever else we want with that. And I think to do so would have been lonely if we did it by ourselves. You would have nobody to share the burden of the losses and nobody to share the celebration of the successes. And I think in that regard, because we both had the same vision as business partners and as friends, as what we wanted to do with our business, as well as what we wanted to do with our lives, it allowed us to share the load when it was difficult and also enjoy the camaraderie of celebration when things were going well. So when we started the firm that way, we always kind of looked at it as the law firm as a means to support the lives that we wanted to live, rather than looking at it as a business with the sole purpose of profit. Its purpose is profit to the extent that profit facilitates freedom. And that's the challenge that we're encountering as we seek to grow further is, how do you continue to grow and scale without compromising that freedom? But that's why we're on a learning journey. And I think as lawyers, you're always on a learning journey. So it's a more fun element to learn when you kind of bundle it with case law, things like that.
Well, and your best friend. So yeah, absolutely. Yep. And so there are ways to protect business owners and things like that. So as a lawyer who represents business owners and entrepreneurs, what would you say are the top 3 ways to make sure that their businesses are protected?
So I think, without trying to get too deep into the legal weeds, but I think first is, as we discussed, is setting clear expectations from the jump of, how much are people willing to commit and what are you expected to deliver? I think the second is planning for what I would consider just kind of ordinary changes in life through things like buy-sell agreements. So if someone decides, for perfectly acceptable reasons, I want to move or I want to start a family or I don't want to be a lawyer anymore, making sure that the partnership has planned to dissolve in an amicable way and in a way that makes economic sense. So that type of fracture doesn't rip the business apart with disruption and with animosity. And then unfortunately, I think it's also important to plan for the crisis situation. In law as well as entrepreneurship, they're both extremely high pressure, high stress type of endeavors. And it is not uncommon for people to buckle under that pressure and succumb to substance abuse or different mental health problems that can come with someone being overly stressed. And unfortunately, we've seen situations where that situation hasn't been contemplated from the start, and you have someone who's flying off the handle or on a bender, and they represent 50% of the company or hold a very significant title in the company. And there's no way to stop that damage and to stop that bleeding. So I think making sure that not only do you set a solid foundation through setting strong expectations at the forefront, but also making sure that you have planned for just diverging paths, whether that be amicably or in a crisis situation, so that the business can respond to it without significant disruption and can continue to provide good service to its clients or its customers, whatever that may be.
And I would add one more thing is start from the beginning to plan your exit because you want to exit, not just because there's a crisis or a diversion. So, of course, I would add that one piece to it as well. Um,
Absolutely.
but I will tell you, one of my friends died recently, and I'm her executor of her estate, and she had a business. And, the difference between somebody who just goes to one of these companies that just does the forms for you, or even just online by yourself, and what you provide. I'm going to have you put some input in this in a second, but essentially, she has a business and it has a patent, and and there's no business operating agreement as to what happens with this business when she dies. And so, of course, even though I did estate planning as a lawyer, it's in a whole different state than where I'm licensed. So I hired a lawyer because I'm not a fool for a client. And I said, what do we do with the business? Is it a personal asset? Is it residue? Is it what? And because she knew exactly who she wanted it to go to, but that's not in her will. And so the lawyer said, well, it's part of the residue estate. So it just goes to the residue beneficiaries, which is not the person who she wanted to go to. So, talk to us about the importance and the difference, I should say, the difference between a law firm like yours that are counselors, are advisors to business owners versus I can just go to the Secretary of State and create my own LLC.
Yeah, I think, if someone goes to the Secretary of State or something like LegalZoom or whatever that may be, you're just kind of getting something that is preformed for any man. It's not necessarily a customized solution for your business and your situation. It'd be, in my opinion, it's akin to walking into a shoe store and just grabbing one off the shelf. You may find a perfectly acceptable and quality shoe, but if it doesn't fit your foot, it's not going to work for your purposes. And even worse, it could hurt you. So I think when you take legal projects and things that weren't formed for your business or your situation, you're grabbing something that may not fit and may actually perform contrary to what you hoped it would do. So when you work with a firm like ours, you're getting that customized service where we're looking into your situation. What are your specific concerns? What are your specific advantages and strengths? And how do you really want this to work out? And then we're building a customized solution to work for those specific circumstances, rather than just pulling something off the shelf and saying, here you go. I hope what actually happens is what this document contemplates.
Mm-hmm. Well, and lawyers oftentimes do exactly, that is, I'm a lawyer and I can just do this kind of stuff without actually seeking real guidance. Would you say that all business owners are entrepreneurs, or all entrepreneurs are business owners?
Not necessarily. I think I admire and respect anyone who's willing to take the risks and the burden of owning their own company. So to that extent, I would say that everybody who owns their own company and kind of is willing to go out on that ledge is in a sense entrepreneurial. But I also see entrepreneurs as people who are willing to strive for something greater than just a profit, people who are looking to innovate, and someone who is really looking to embody that idea of taking additional risks to achieve additional freedom or benefits or whatever that may be for whoever they seek to serve. So I think there's just something a little extra in what I would consider an entrepreneur versus just every single business owner.
And what kind of innovations have you and your partner put into your law firm that could be beneficial for other lawyers listening to this who are building their law firms now? What kind of new and different things have y'all incorporated that help you at this stage?
So I think it's, in the law, we learn to stand on the shoulders of giants. And at times that means we don't take a fresh look at certain business strategies or marketing tactics or what have you, because we think doing it the way it's always been done is a perfectly acceptable and often preferred way of practicing law. I don't think that necessarily applies to operating a business. So in our practice, we have taken a large focus on certain digital marketing tactics, whether that be trying to generate an internet presence or things like Google reviews, or things where the modern market of legal consumers is looking to establish your credibility and your reputation, or just being aware of technological tools. I don't necessarily trust AI to do legal work yet, but I do think it is going to change the legal game. And I think it's important to be aware of the tools that are available and be aware of what benefits they can offer and what drawbacks they offer, just so that if and when the day comes that does become a true game changer, you can be in front of the curve as opposed to behind the curve. So I think it's less about any finite action and more about an open-mindedness and willingness to embrace the change and embrace new ways of doing things, where you spend 3 years in law school being taught that the way it has been done is the way it should be done.
Absolutely. And so for entrepreneurs, what would you say can you point to like the top 3 mistakes that as a trend most entrepreneurs make?
Yeah, I would say in no particular order. I think entrepreneurs get way too far ahead of themselves before they seek to do any housekeeping. They'll just, and it's understandable because revenue is what makes a business successful, but they'll charge into their market and charge into their business. And now they've got something great and they actually haven't defined job titles. They haven't defined restrictions or anything in the business that is kind of any type of order or structure. And it becomes much more difficult to do when emotions are high and people start seeing profit. I think entrepreneurs often get very attracted to shiny things, and whether that's a new way of doing things or some hotshot person who offers to sell them the sun and the stars for some equity, and they give it to them without any consequence of how they might get it back, or people who think they're rich immediately and they start throwing out equity like candy. Say, hey, I'll give a percentage of my company to the valet who parked my car because I don't have cash on me.
Yeah, that's a nice tip. So not building the foundations and then being overconfident and generous when we don't really have the money because it's all fluff.
Right.
Okay, great. Well, if there were one thing that you would want all of our listeners to know before we get off today, what's the one thing you'd want to leave in their brains?
So I think, considering that many listeners are attorneys and people seeking to kind of either get into their own law firm or exit their own law firm, I would just offer a word of encouragement and remind everyone that as attorneys, based on our training, our primary skill set is to learn what we don't know. And we go to law school and we basically learn the skill of finding the question to be answered, finding the authority on that question, finding the answer, and then pulling on that string to find the next question. And to the same extent, we can learn that to do corporate law or to do estate law or, what have you, environmental law. We can do that for entrepreneurship and business ownership. If you don't know how to do marketing or you don't know how to do HR, you don't know how to do any of these core functions, you already possess the skill set to learn all of those things and do them for yourself for your own benefit. So I would just offer a word of encouragement to say, as daunting as it may seem or as large of a challenge as it may look like, just to have confidence in yourself that you're able to do that and you already possess the skill set necessary to succeed.
Great. Well, thank you so much. What I love about this discussion we've had today is that while it sounds like we're just talking about just general business and entrepreneurship, it actually does apply to all the lawyers that are listening because we're all in business, right? And often we don't have that confidence that you're talking about because we have tunnel vision that we went to law school to learn law. I couldn't possibly know how to do the marketing things and stuff like that. But there's so much that we can do and take advantage and build a great law firm just like you and your partner have done. So thank you so much, Josh, for being here.
Victoria, thanks so much for having me. It's been fun.
You're welcome. Well, if you are ready to take your law firm serious and treat it like a real business, then I invite you to become a member of our private Facebook group called The Art of Buying and Selling Law Firms and continue to listen to our podcast, Smart Lawyers Position and Transition. You can also find information at our website, quidproquolaw.com. You have been listening to Smart Lawyers Position and Transition, which is a weekly show bringing timely and valuable information to lawyers seeking to sell or buy a law firm between now and 5 years from today. The show is available 24/7 online anywhere you listen to podcasts, as well as on our website, quidproquolaw.com.